This is Open Parameter Podcast, conversations about the intersection of life and art with artists from around the world. Come chat with us on our Discord server and get monthly early access to episodes by becoming a supporting member today at patreon.com/openparameter. Welcome back to Open Parameter Podcast. I'm Del Cook, and Stejara is back with me today, which is something I really appreciate. She is currently working hard to qualify for her PhD. So, Stej, how is that going for you?
It's been going pretty well. I just finished up the first half of my qualifying exam, which is just this big report thesis thing. And so I turned that in recently and am now working on the project portion. So I'm really excited to be in the lab getting my hands dirty.
That is fantastic. I hope that you're having a lot of fun with that.
Thanks so much. Going great.
So I'm really excited to talk to our guest today. She's someone who both Stejara and I went to undergrad with at SMU. Her name is Angelica Reisch. She is an artist focused in video and installation work, as well as art publishing and cultural organizing. From 2016 to 2019, Reisch printed and published 2 full publications titled Holding Pattern with an artist collective called DADE, of which she is a co-founder. In 2018, Reisch earned her BFA in studio art from the Meadows School of the Arts in Dallas, and she currently works as a graphic designer in New York City. Angie, it's great to see you again. How have you been? How are things up in where you live in New York?
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. It's great to see you guys and things are going well. It's been obviously a whirlwind of a past year with the pandemic for everybody and but yeah, I'm here in New York City, up in Harlem. Just trekking along, working, trying to keep up my art practice and you know, stay connected as much as possible.
What's the situation really? I sometimes look at the news, but it can be so depressing, right?
It can be
So
a lot. It's okay to
yeah.
to detox.
What's the situation like? What's the COVID restraints situation in Harlem at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, I think it was just today. The vaccine is now those who are 30 years and older are eligible for the vaccine, and in the next couple weeks, those older than 16 will be eligible. So yeah, it's been an interesting kind of journey to get to this point. Um, I've only been in New York for a bit over a year, but I think New Yorkers are very resilient, and yeah, it's nice to see the city kind of come back alive a bit. We're also just I think everyone's starting to shake off the seasonal winter depression. The weather's getting warmer, and things are opening up outside. I think there seems to be kind of a feeling of hope and hopefully a new kind of fresh start on the horizon. With the vaccine becoming more widely available, the weather warming up, I think it's a good time to be in New York City.
That's great. I always my mood always gets so much better around April. Like
Yeah, it's a real thing.
mhm. Yeah, I have serious winter depression. Like I felt a mild jealousy towards Stejara like during the winter since she lives out in like sunny Santa Barbara.
Oh
And
yeah. Yeah, us Texans in New York, it's we we're not used to that northeast winter.
yeah, I'd like every time I was on the phone with Stejara, I'd be like, "Is that the sun? I can hear the sun."
I can hear the sun. I forget what it looks like.
You guys
Right.
say it's like bright and sunny here, but the nights get really cold. Like I still have to put on jackets even now and in
Oh
December
man,
too.
gotta put on a jacket, man.
That's the sound of tiny violins. Okay, I'm kidding. I never do that joke. Uh, anyway, so getting into the questions. So I can remember the first time I wanted to be a composer, and I this pretty much of all of our guests. But when in your life, your childhood or adulthood, did you decide I want to be an artist?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's tough also. I think I don't know if there was ever necessarily a specific moment where I, kind of verbalized this is what I want to do, but um I think, I was lucky enough to grow up in kind of a unique family of artists where that was really cultivated from a young age. And I had the freedom to explore what it meant to kind of, um, yeah, have a creative or an artistic outlet, lifestyle. I do remember I have a very strong memory of when I was, I don't know, 7 years old in first grade, and we had these kind of like our breakout time where we got to, you know, play indoors, do whatever we wanted. And I, at the time, my one of my aunts has horses, and so I was very excited about these horses, and so I would draw her horses. And I remember very strongly, different people in our class coming up and being like, "Whoa, that's so cool! You're so good at this. Can you teach me?" And I like formed this kind of group teaching all these other first graders about drawing horses. And I think, I don't know, that's always stuck with me as like kind of an impactful moment of realizing at a young age, like, oh, this is something that I really enjoy doing, but kind of getting that recognition of like, oh, you're good at this, or like you have kind of a skill for this, and like, can you teach us? Can you share that with us? Um, so yeah, I think that was from a young age that it was something I was always really interested in kind of cultivating and exploring more.
Who were some of the first artists that started to sort of influence your own work?
Mm. Um, yeah, I remember in high school I had to give a presentation on Rembrandt, and it's kind of a research presentation, but also about his life, but also kind of his methods. The way looking at his process, and I remember that was um, yeah, kind of the first time I think I had taken a deeper dive into looking at an artist's process and kind of looking at what their methods are, how they, approach their work. Um, and yeah, also seeing like how someone could manipulate color, light, form, all of those things to have create a really strong emotional response, at least for me at the time. Um, and yeah, so I remember, that was kind of an important moment, I think, in my early high school years. And then in college, in undergrad, um, I had the opportunity to come to New York through a program sponsored by the art department. And I saw Pipilotti Reist show at the New Museum. It was the Pixel Forest installation, and I think that was in, gosh, 2015 or 2016. But I remember it's this huge installation um, where you walk in, there's kind of these oscillating lights and video footage of the artist kind of looking up at her as she's swimming through water. And then, so it's this very dreamy kind of environment in this large, almost warehouse-like space. Um, and then there's throughout the floor, there's different beds um, laid out, which now in pandemic times seems like horrifying. But you're invited as a viewer to come and lay in one of the beds, potentially next to a stranger, and just watch this scene kind of unfolding. And there's kind of this orchestral music. And I remember being in that space for a long time and thinking like, wow, she has just created this entire environment that we're all now existing in. And I think that was kind of an important moment for me as well, moving from, wow, someone can create, you know, an emotional experience through a two-dimensional medium, whether it's paint using light and color, and then kind of looking at, wow, you can actually create whole environments that we can exist in, and that is considered art. And I remember thinking like, this is huge. Um, and so that's when I kind of started getting more into video work, installation work. Um, but yeah, thinking about, kind of artists at the time that were kind of pivotal for me, or kind of help carve that trajectory. Those are, the two that come to mind immediately.
I love that you said that one of the influences on you was creating an environment that people could exist in.
Hmm.
And that's kind of something that I've always sort of latched onto as well as a composer or my my brief career as a performance artist. And I
We've
remember
all
there
been
was
there.
yeah, I know, right? We've all had brief careers as performance artists. Uh, I mean, particularly, I remember, we met at undergrad, and I remember there was this one time I encountered you late at night, just absolutely demolishing a large canvas that you had set up in the lobby, and I think it was a piece you titled Two Absences on a Planar Surface."
Hmm.
I can't remember what you said, but I remember feeling. I also can't quite remember what you were doing, if you were hitting it with an object or an instrument, but I remember feeling like this is really interesting, and also feeling very intimidated at the same time, because you were just beating the crap out of this canvas. And would you say that performance art plays a large role in your work?
That's a good question. No one's asked me that before. I think like in any piece there's an element of performance, right? I remember Lauren Woods was also a really impactful artist and instructor that I worked with in undergrad. And I remember her saying like all work is and I don't remember the exact way she phrased this, but essentially all work is artwork is identity driven or identity work. So essentially a self-portrait of some kind. Um, and I think there is some element of performance in that, right? Like, um, I think in those pieces, a few different installation pieces or video pieces, in terms of documentation, they've happened to include some, performative elements to them in terms of displaying the work. Um, but yeah, I don't know if I've ever quite figured out my relationship to performance in terms of my own work. I know there are elements of it. I haven't quite digested it, I think, but yeah, I know there's something in there that like there is some element of kind of, a self-identifying moment in all of those pieces.
Angie, I wanted to ask a follow-up question about this thought of performance. And for me, I find that performance and interaction are very intertwined, at least in my work. And I was wondering if when you create work, especially installation work or performance artwork, if you're really thinking about that interaction that the audience has with your piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess looking at kind of the two bigger installation pieces I've done recently, interaction was pretty essential to those pieces. So, Dell, the piece you had mentioned earlier, two absences on the planar surface, that was explicitly set up as an interactive environment. So, which, yeah, ended up being kind of a wild experiment in a few different ways. So, basically, the kind of simple process, just for the background, was I had created this wall. So basically, I think it was 8 by 8 feet, kind of a standalone wall, and um, painted it blue, and then had used plaster to create what I called a body mark on it. So basically, using my own body to create certain marks on this wall. And then I left this wall out for about 10 days in a public space and left instructions for anyone who passed by. They could use any of the tools that I had laid out to either make a mark or enact some sort of erasure on this wall. So I was kind of interested in that interaction between me and the people, encountering this piece. The idea was every night, which Dell, I think that's when you came across me crazed in the middle of the night. Um, I would come back and try and repair the piece to its original state. So I would do that every night. And I think I went into that a bit naively, thinking, okay, people will come by, maybe they'll make a little mark, maybe they'll, write something. Within On day two, people had come by and completely destroyed this wall, so completely torn it apart. Um, and so basically, and it's explicit in the title, two absences on the planar surface. The planar surface being this wall, looking at kind of the absence and presence between both me and the person interacting with the piece, and kind of, okay, what is our relationship with each other between kind of that cyclical cycle of creation and erasure or destruction, and kind of going through that process in a routine manner, for almost 2 weeks. So, in terms of your question with interaction, that was really not only a part of that piece, but kind of the key critical element to that piece. It would not have existed without that interaction. And yeah, I think that has popped up in some of my other installation pieces as well. I know in any sort of performance or interactive installation piece, it's kind of like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, like, did it make a sound? It's always thinking about what is that kind of interaction with the viewer or the person, approaching this piece. How does that change the context of the work? What does it mean to have these pieces in a public versus a private space? That's been kind of an important driving factor in a lot of these pieces. I think by nature of having these pieces in public places, you're inviting that interaction, which kind of also leaves quite a bit up to chance, right? Um, leaving part of that autonomy in the viewers or the user's hand. Um, so yeah, I think that's something that's very interesting to me, um, especially in terms of the context of the space in which that interaction is happening.
In there's a parallel to this in music composition, particularly today, when composers write music that allows for a certain degree of indeterminacy or chance, as you said. And
Hmm.
there's a debate that's sort of still going on of, how much chance is too much chance, how much
Mm,
control, how much control is too much control to relinquish to
hmm.
the either the performer or the audience. And you kind of hinted at this, but in that work, two absences on a planar surface, do you feel like you may have relinquished too much control, or because you said that it was, ultimately, because I think I did catch you, the night you were kind of checking on your baby, so to speak, and you were just kind of standing there in shock, just like, oh my god, they destroyed it.
Yeah, it was pretty shocking. It was I truly did not expect that at all, especially because while this was in a public space, it was highly surveilled, right? It's in a university setting, there's cameras everywhere. Um, yeah, it was really really pretty interesting. I think it's an interesting question too, that like, what is the balance of control that you, as the kind of conceptualizer of this piece, or the creator of this piece, like what then becomes your role in that? Um I think for me, it was a good, I guess for lack of a better term, like lesson, right? Or at least experience of saying, okay, if I'm going to create these environments or these kind of interactions where I'm allowing people, giving them permission to interact, to alter, to touch this piece. Um, it's really, yeah, then it is fully out of my hands. Um, so I think yeah, I think now approaching um, that question of interactivity or creating environments or pieces in which people can play an active role in it. Yeah, I think my role in that as the artist is basically to set up that environment and allow it to run and see what comes out of it. I think that was actually it was shocking, but it was a good outcome, I think. I think it would have been a pretty boring piece had it just um kind of turned out how I thought it would or how I wanted it to. I actually remember in one of our early crits, maybe halfway through art school, somebody had told me in the critique, your work is too perfect. It's too precise. Like you're exerting too much control. Like from the beginning where you're going to end up with this piece. And at the time, I was like kind of offended. So I was like, no, I'm like researching this, I'm planning this out, like I'm doing the work to make sure this is an informed piece, which I think is important. But I think this person, who I have no idea who it was at this point, I wish I did. Uh, but I think they were right. Like, I think that's important to have that balance of kind of tightening up that grip on the outcome, especially because I think ultimately it's going to create more interesting work, more um, I don't know, open up to different outcomes and possibilities with a piece.
These ideas of agency and control that you're talking about are really interesting and poignant to me personally, just because of working with technology and having technology be considered as a sort of agent
Hmm.
um, that has some sort of control in the product or in what I'm creating. And I was wondering if in your process you incorporate maybe non-biological agents in this way, or maybe make decisions or allow other processes to make decisions besides just other people or
Sure.
besides just yourself as the artist.
Yeah, that's a good question, especially related to technology and kind of seeing who has agency in a certain situation. I think the first thing that comes to mind, and this is not so much tech related, but in terms of like a non-human interactive element to a piece. I did this one installation that was shown at the Texas Vignette Art Fair, as well as at SMU, at the Meadows School of the Arts. And it was a 400 square foot installation that was composed of um, these different panels, sheer panels, basically curtain panels. Um, and then it had video projection on each side, so kind of mapped onto this floating, kind of ephemeral material. So in that piece, in terms of interaction, which I guess relates to a biological kind of element, but people coming in and out of that space, or even just the kind of environment that it was in, the kind of floating, the swaying of those curtains with the air currents actually ended up being a pretty important element to that piece and added a I think pretty meaningful um, conceptual grounding in it. So I think something as simple as, you know, the airflow or the air current in a space, or even something as simple as light, right? So like video projection, it's just light, um, hitting this surface. Um, so yeah, I think in terms of interaction, like, we probably think of it as the first kind of way we think of it as is human interaction, right? Like someone touching a piece or someone tearing apart a wall, right? But I think interaction can actually be extended to have way more meaning than that. As you've referenced with technology, with kind of um, systems that have their own agency or that impact, the environment or the piece, that you don't really have control over. They kind of act as their own element, informing the meaning and the kind of sensation of that piece.
And that piece that you're talking about was titled "Untitled Anti-Monument," correct?
Hmm. That's correct.
But first of all, that's one of the coolest titles I've ever heard. Also, when I got to see that piece in person, and I'm looking at it on your website right now, and it is still probably one of the coolest uh, exhibitions I've ever seen ever.
Oh, thank you.
Uh, especially in the space that you exhibited it. I walked in there one night and was just like, "Whoa, who did this? Like, this is amazing." Um, why did you title it Untitled Anti-Monument?
Oh, that's a good question. So at the time, this was also when I was working with Lauren Woods pretty closely, who, if you are at all familiar with her or her work, really, a big component of it is addressing monuments in different ways, and also the idea of the anti-monument. So that piece, which, looking back on it, I'm not sure how successful or unsuccessful it was at, kind of addressing ideas of monumentality or, anti-monumentality. But, when we think of monuments, um, kind of some of the ideas I was thinking about at the time, which I'm still thinking about too, and again with public and private space. But we have monuments, which really, in effect, they are kind of concrete, often, large pillars or sculptures or, obelisks that commemorate a historical event. But they often tell us, how we're supposed to remember this event, how we're supposed to remember these people, and as a consequence, that impacts, our collective memory of certain events and, certain ways we think about the, the history of, at the time I was thinking just, locally or domestically within the US, but really it has a very large scale impact on our collective historical memory. So this piece was looking specifically at, whiteness and me as a white female artist. What is my relationship to whiteness, and also, as it's connected to monuments or, kind of public spaces. So, and I think that includes certain historical texts as well. Those kind of occupy a public space as well, in a more kind of conceptual way. So the texts that were projected, so it was, these letters and sentences being typed out and then edited, kind of corrected in real time. And they were certain pieces of historically racist legislation that were part of, our Constitution at the time. And so I was really looking at what is my relationship to whiteness as a whole, but also, these texts, these very concrete texts that serve as monuments in a way. So I was going in, typing these texts out myself, kind of recording that action, and then putting it back into a public space to kind of make sure these texts were not forgotten. I think, the the current, um, uh, kind of MO is to we want to forget or erase. Again, that's another thing that's come up is this idea of erasure. We want to erase these ideas, these texts. We don't want to think about them in school. Kids aren't taught about these certain pieces of legislation. Um, so yeah, I kind of wanted to see what does that mean to put that back into public space, and then in terms of that term anti-monument, kind of looking at the aesthetics of the monument, right? So rather than this concrete pillar that is erected and meant to stand in perpetuity. All the materials used in this piece are very ephemeral. So it's really light and kind of a see-through sheer curtain that moves and flows as people, come through it. Um, so yeah, I think there's it would be interesting to you know dive back into some of that research. I think I was 19, 20 when maybe a bit older when that piece was made. It was the biggest installation I had done, and it was a big bite to chew off. So um, yeah, I think in terms of that title, it was really kind of grappling with that idea of the monument and what it means to kind of have the anti-monument stand against it.
I mean, yeah, it's incredibly pertinent research and incredibly pertinent work to be doing, especially right now, as um, domestically, as you said, as we have in America, this. I don't like to call it a conversation or a debate because what's the platform for that?
Hmm.
Is the platform for the news media? They always say it like there's now a national debate on gun
Hmm.
violence, or there's now a
Hmm.
national debate. It's sparked a national debate. It's like, has it really though, or is it just two
Hmm.
sides yelling at themselves in an echo chamber? And
Hmm.
so, to some degree, I think that right now domestically, um, the role of monuments is there is a debate going on somewhere, but for the most part, I think it's people yelling at themselves in an echo chamber about the role of monuments. And so anyone who's doing any sort of real research or work into finding a consensus on what we should do about old monuments that at this point, now we feel collectively a sort of revisionism about them,
Hmm.
I think is incredibly important, and it's something I definitely want to grapple with in the future on either this
Hmm.
show or on another service that Open Parameter can offer. Without getting too off topic here, but because now you've gotten me extremely interested in talking about this. You brought up an interesting point, and it's one that I feel, which is there is this narrative of let's just erase this stuff. Some people can say you can't erase it for one reason, and others might say you shouldn't erase it because then people will forget.
Hmm.
Others might say you can't erase it because then you're erasing my heritage, right? We've heard that
Hmm.
before.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and uh, what is true? I mean, like I don't I'm kind of I'm on board with you in that I don't think that it's a good idea to completely put it away or destroy. They shouldn't still stand, but they also shouldn't be completely demolished because then it'll happen again.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a big issue right now and has been, for a while. I think it's a balance, right? Of these relics essentially of whether it's slavery era America, Jim Crow. It's incredibly those relics are incredibly harmful, right, to certain communities of color, um, communities that have are still being impacted by the effects of that. Um, so I think you're right. It is a balance of ensuring that no further harm is being done to these communities that have been harmed for so long by by these events, by these people, and by continuing to give a platform, right? I think in the name of heritage, right? I think there has to be a way of looking at, remembering, educating in a educational context of being really mindful of how we handle this information. It's very fragile information, has a lot of power still to harm people, um, to be quite destructive. So I think there has to be a way of handling this information in a way that is educational, so as not to erase the events of really what has made our country what it is, that our country stands on, but that doesn't do further harm.
Yeah, Angie, I think that that work is so poignant, and you mentioned just Lauren Woods's work in that area as well. Just really poignant work. Definitely encourage all of the listeners to go take a look at this work. But you also mentioned doing a lot of research as part of your approach to your work, and especially these large installation works that really require a lot of research and knowledge and inquisition.
Hmm.
Um, and I was just wondering what your process is when you approach making art, whether that's a painting or a drawing or something as there's something more complex like your installation work. Do you have like a general process?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it has changed over time, and also depending on kind of the piece I'm working on, or the content within there. Um, so with these bigger public installations that I think are have really, or kind of revolve around very sensitive content. I think, especially as a young and white artist, like, I have a responsibility to be informed, to not be ignorant about what I'm putting out there, and I, inevitably have made mistakes or been ill-informed about something. And but yeah, I think it's a process. For me, in terms of a larger process, specifically with installation work, um, yeah, I typically do a lot of reading. Um, with the anti-monument piece, I read a lot of James Young's work, explicitly on the idea of the anti-monument. So a lot of reading, a lot of research into who is already kind of addressing these themes and concepts, and how are they doing so. What is the context in which I'm making this work? So thinking about location, positionality, um, who who is going to be interacting with it if it is indeed an interactive piece. Kind of all of those contextual questions, right? Like, those are, for me, very important considerations in terms of the environment, um, and people. Um, so yeah, seeing what other artists, who is writing about this, where, what can I, basically trying to learn as much as I can about it before moving forward with creating something, to speak on it, right? I want to feel at least informed enough to kind of make work around a certain subject. So yeah, those kinds of pieces are very research heavy, kind of pre-production heavy. I think once the actual plan is in place, the actual physical installation can come together much quicker than the research component, or kind of the pre-production component. but it's interesting. I've been working on these drawings for about the past year. I did month-long residency at Vermont Studio Center in Johnson, Vermont, and I went into that residency having kind of an idea of what I wanted to do. I wanted to make um, these small scale video pieces, kind of using maquettes and video mapping. And I spent a few days working on that, and it was like not happening once I got there. And I had brought kind of on an impulse this like old bag of oil pastels that I'd had, I think, since I was a kid, like really not great quality. And I just started drawing kind of without a plan. And these drawings kind of came out of nowhere, which is not typical for me, right? Like I like doing that kind of research. I like feeling informed about a certain piece, and maybe part of that is driven by, kind of the art school, um, environment where you need to have a concept, you need to be able to defend it, you need to be able to talk extensively about it. So I think I hadn't made work like that in quite a long time, um, where I just kind of went with it and had a strong impulse and followed that impulse. So these drawings ended up being very colorful, almost Matisse-like, kind of childlike, very playful interior drawings. And in hindsight, I realized I've been working on, making work for so long that was centered around ideas of public space and how do we access public space? How do we interact with public space? Um, and these drawings were very focused on private spaces. They just the space itself. And this was, just 3 months before the pandemic hit, when we were all kind of sequestered to our private spaces, and that kind of took on a new meaning. Um, but yeah, in terms of back to the question, in terms of process, I think it really, for me, it depends on the kind of work I'm making. I'm really enjoying right now continuing to make these drawings. I think they have kind of taken on a life of their own. I still don't know necessarily, quote unquote, what they're about or what they are, but I know they're exciting and I get a lot of kind of this like giddiness out of making them. Um, so yeah, for now, I'm like following that impulse and going to continue making them as long as they feel good, and then we'll see where that goes. But yeah, that process definitely varies.
I don't feel like I'd be able to get away with talking with you without asking about DADE, which I mentioned at the top of the program. It's something that you co-founded in 2016, correct?
Yeah,
And it's no long it's unfortunately it's no longer in operation.
out of office. Yeah,
Out of office, yes. Well, I guess my question is what was DADE? What was its purpose? What did it do? And who was a part of it? And why does it not operate any longer?
sure. So Dade Collective, as you mentioned, we started in 2016. We being myself, Diana Antoje, DS Chapman, and Ellen Smith. So, I'll just say up top, like as for why we're no longer kind of working on Dade anymore, is we were at the time based in Dallas. We've all since kind of spread far and wide across the country. So I think Dade was very locally focused. It didn't make sense anymore for us to be, I'm in New York, Deanna is in Richmond, Ellen is in Dallas, and DS Chapman is in California. So we kind of cover a wide span. So basically, just for logistical, practical issues, I think we didn't want to drag it out if it wasn't going to make the kind of local impact or have that kind of local space anymore. Um, but yeah, DADE was started. Ellen Smith kind of brought us all together, the four of us. This was in the wake of the 2016 election, when Trump was first elected. And at the time, there was a big response to this, in a lot of different ways. So you had the Women's March, which was very, we kind of referred to it as pussy centric. So the pink pussy hats, and the same thing was kind of happening with certain art shows. So there were a lot of like, quote unquote nasty women exhibitions, all women centered exhibitions, as kind of, and not to discredit that kind of organizing. I think it does have value. But I think a lot of these were started as kind of a knee-jerk reaction to the election. And so we were kind of interested in looking at not just the election, but the response to it in the form of in these different medium. So we were looking at, what is considered women's work, and how can we give a platform to female identifying artists as well as non-binary artists in a way that doesn't feel pigeonholing, right? It doesn't have to be without this kind of pre-existing notion of, or preconceived notion of what women's work is, as kind of this pink washed idea. And so we just started super locally. We reached out to artists that we knew in the community that we respected and enjoyed collaborating with, and put together the first publication called Holding Pattern. That initially, I forget how many artists were in that initially, but it was, I think, 15 or around 15. And it was really just a way to, highlight, showcase some of the work in the community that we thought was really smart, thoughtful, important, that we wanted to kind of elevate. So along with that publication, we held a book launch at the Wild Detectives, to not just have this publication, but to have again, using that word, conversation around it. So giving some context to why are we doing this? What is the larger context, larger conversation that's happening? So we invited some members from Toxic Shock, which was a women's artist collective started in the 80s, to discuss kind of from an intergenerational viewpoint of like, these aren't new issues. These aren't new ideas that we're grappling with. So we wanted to lend a voice to artists who have been working in this kind of space since the 80s. So we published one other publication, volume 2, which hugely expanded. So volume 1 was just local artists, primarily based in Dallas. Volume 2 was extended to artists around the US as well as internationally. We received a grant from the DMA, and a grant from the National Sculpture Center, to produce this work. So we worked with really talented graphic designer, Natalia Padilla, and produced our second publication. So I think, like, even though we're no longer producing Holding Pattern, that publication, I think that experience was super valuable, to see, to have that kind of sense of community, to see how quickly people were willing to jump to participate, and kind of building this larger sense of community of artists, very locally, but also starting to build beyond that.
It's really cool that you got grants from the DMA and the Nasher Sculpture Center.
Yeah, they are hugely supportive of projects like this.
So I'd like to talk about. We've talked a lot about what you've done locally in Dallas and about your general studio art practice, but I'd like to talk about the reason for why you're in New York City, which is correct me if I'm wrong, but you moved there for employment as a graphic designer, correct?
So, not quite, although that is related to what I'm doing. So, I moved to New York February 1st, 2020, 3 weeks before the pandemic hit. Right. So I was working at the time as a studio assistant for really amazing, talented, beautiful artist, Tamika Rivera, based in Brooklyn. Pandemic hit, things kind of fell apart, as they did for everybody. And then, yeah, started working as a designer for a small company based in Long Island, but that also works in New York. So yeah, that's kind of that's been interesting as well to incorporate more of a design focus into my practice as well. Having kind of my studio practice as well as practice as a UX UI designer.
So what exactly is a UX UI designer?
Good question. So a little tech talk here. But yeah, UX just stands for user experience, UI user interface. So what that means for what I do specifically is basically creating, digital products and experiences for users. So for me, that incorporates anything from branding to website development to app prototyping, wireframing, kind of anything under the sun. But I think it's art and design are obviously very related. They're also very different in a lot of ways. They're very different practices, and that's I like to kind of keep my practice broad and not necessarily exclude that from my artistic practice, but it does kind of fall into a different category in my brain, or at least that's how I think of it. But really, I think a lot of the same kind of concepts and conceptual grounding that applies to my studio practice applies here as well. In my design work, like the key driver is always to keep the user at the center of everything you do. So thinking about how is someone interacting with this? Again, back to interaction, like it kind of comes full circle. How is someone using this? How is someone benefiting from this? What is their experience moving through this product? Whether it's a website, an app, um, you know, uh, anything like that. Um, so I've had luckily been able to work on some design projects that are very, socially driven. So that's been, a big learning experience since I've stepped into this role is seeing ways in which design and a UX UI design practice can have really big social impact and kind of social interaction.
How did you find yourself in that role? Did you study pure studio art in school, or did you also study graphic design as a supplement to that, or did you go from pure studio art and then suddenly you're a UX designer? Like how did that transition occur?
Yeah, no, I had 0.0% professional training in any of this. Um, so yeah, my background and was, very transparent about this with, this job in particular, but my background is as a visual artist. My degree is I have a BFA in studio art. My experience is really within the visual art world, arts nonprofits, you know, museum world. But That being said, I think I've kind of it's easier to connect the dots in hindsight. I think I've been around a lot of designers for a long time, had the opportunity to kind of get familiar with what is human-centered design, what can a design practice include beyond just graphic design, like bigger service design, product design, things that have the potential to be really high impact. So in undergrad, I was part of this social impact fellowship, which really pushed a kind of design thinking approach to social issues, also very local to Dallas. And that was housed within the MADI program at SMU, which is the Master of Arts in Design and Innovation. So I think maybe some of that rubbed off on me, and just by proximity and meeting people, kind of seeing this world that was kind of clearly had some overlap, but really had its own kind of procedures and processes. Um, I think that had a big impact on me, and kind of got a secondhand education from those experiences. But yeah, I think a lot of the way I approach my art practice is really a similar approach to my design work as well, right? We were just talking about research and being really well informed, and I mean, that's a huge tenet of a UX design process is research, know who's out there, know who the competitors are, know who's doing what, um, know what the user needs and kind of what their pain points are. I think a lot of that kind of conceptually that process still applies. Um, so I think yeah, it's I use a lot of the same approaches, and it's just been a matter for me of you know getting up to date with um, the software, kind of the technical background of learning some of these processes a bit more concretely. To do that, I've also uh, have been doing. I'm almost complete with a UX UI design specialization through CalArts. So that's been cool to kind of have that educational component as well. Um, but yeah, it's definitely been a shift, but yeah, I also don't want to, kind of limit the scope of my art practice to not include that because I think it has become an important part of that as well.
That's really awesome to hear, and just your journey through all of these different areas of art, like not just dealing in one specific discipline, but branching out and getting your hands dirty with all of these different aspects. One thing that really struck me when you were answering a couple minutes back, thinking about kind of design and how it relates to interaction and also like social issues in general. And I just wanted to recommend for any listeners out there who are interested in this. Sasha Constanza Chalk has a really good book called Design Justice, which
Hmm.
kind of tackles this idea of community led practices and how that works with design and in the design world, and specifically thinking about the community spaces that we build around making practices and the tools that we create and having them be accessible
Yep.
to all groups. And so,
Right.
if anyone out there who's interested or anyone out there who's listening is interested in this, it's definitely phenomenal work, and I highly recommend it. And I definitely agree. Like I personally don't see design work as really I would say that it is split a little bit in my head, just because, like, as you had mentioned, it's a very different discipline, but it also is very interconnected in this way and very
Hmm.
important. And so I definitely resonate with all of the things that you had said.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you hit a big point too, which is accessibility within design. And kind of the things we're creating. That is something I've definitely become more in tune with is, whether it's web design, who can access the internet? How do we make the internet more accessible for all users? Um, and then, yeah, to that point, I'm one of the projects I'm working on right now with another designer and kind of growth strategist in New York is this app called Accessible. So thinking about accessibility, we're both based in New York, which is a very inaccessible city. Getting going anywhere, taking the subway, walking up my five-story walk up. Getting anywhere, it's very difficult. And there's a lot of people who live here with, differing abilities. And so this app is kind of looking to be the first marketplace to consolidate those resources for people. So, promoting which businesses are accessible. Are the tables at the right height for someone in a wheelchair? Are there ramps? Are there people who have American Sign Language training, all of these considerations, we're looking to kind of consolidate into one place, which there are certain accessibility resources, but they're, really ugly and not user friendly. So yeah, we're looking to build that out. So yeah, that's also been exciting in terms of accessibility within design and kind of the I don't know, broader impact and considerations that go into it. I should mention as well, her name is Daniela Decker.
That's wonderful to hear about. I'm really excited about that work. Definitely keep me updated when the app hits the market. I'd love to
Yeah.
love to check it out. I also wanted to ask, just because we kind of touched upon this before, but you moved to New York right before the pandemic, and obviously this has gone on for a lot longer than probably all of us realized when it started. And
Yeah, dude.
just wanted to see how COVID has really affected your art practice. You had mentioned these drawings that you're working on, and how they kind of almost transformed with the pandemic, and gained this new meaning because they're these interior spaces that are very intimate. And
Hmm.
has COVID impacted any other part of your practice?
Yeah. No, it's been a whirlwind, since in the past year or so. I think yeah, I mean these drawings in particular um started before the pandemic, but pretty soon before the pandemic hit. So they did kind of take on this new context. That really, I mean, it goes through ebbs and flows, right? But that those drawings have really been kind of yeah, kind of a continual source of um, I don't know, of relief or yeah, just happiness, for lack of a better term. Those they have just kind of like, I don't know, come exponentially. But yeah, in terms of just general practice and also, being in New York, got laid off my job within a couple months of moving to the city. So that was a little stressful. But did did freelance stuff, did really tapped into my artist friends and artist community and to see what else is out there. Finding a job in a pandemic is not the most fun. I wouldn't recommend it if you can avoid it. But yeah, it's I'm in a way I'm grateful for that because it's it kind of steered me into this design practice, which has been really exciting and kind of a really nice marriage for me of a really creative artistic practice as well as something that's hyper analytical, research driven, very conceptual. Having kind of the marriage of those two things makes my brain super super happy. And so yeah, that's definitely been the focus of my practice in the past 6 or 8 months for sure.
You spoke about this app called Accessibo. What other projects are you currently working on?
Yeah, there's always a million and one things going at once. But yeah, a few kind of social impact projects, entrepreneurial projects. I'd mentioned when I first moved to New York, I was working with Tamika Rivera, an artist based in Brooklyn. We've collaborated, throughout the past year on a few different things, namely with her organization Here Projects. It's which there's some overlap between DADE and kind of my background with that and Here Projects, but really it's kind of a community resource platform for artists. I think largely based in New York right now, but the plan is to have kind of a wider reach. But yeah, I've been working with her on there's some some exciting stuff coming with Here Projects, curatorial projects, kind of community outreach projects. So that's been a really kind of sustaining thing over the past year as well. Tamika has a saying that she mentions a lot, which I love, and it kind of drives her multidisciplinary art practice. So she always says, who's feeding the family, and in terms of kind of that community support, right? So I think that's kind of the driving force behind Here Projects is, all right, let's feed our artist family, let's make sure people are supported and have a community to access. So yeah, that Accessible, also working on some creative direction and design for a company called Tiny Values based in San Francisco. So it's a subscription box, a monthly subscription box geared towards parents who want to teach their kids values. So kind of the mission behind that is that we send our kids to school to learn math and science and kind of these hard skills, but when it comes to their value system and kind of their social awareness, we kind of just leave that up to chance, hoping they'll pick it up off the street and be a good person. So this is really giving that a little more structure and priority to. So every month is basically a different value, whether it's kindness or resilience, bravery. These boxes come with different activities and resources to help parents kind of support parents in that way. So doing a lot of design work for them, which is really exciting. I don't know. Always got a few side projects going, but those are the ones I'm pretty excited about right now.
Sounds like your hands are definitely full with all of these amazing things that you've been working on. Wow.
Thank you. Always the hands are too full.
Angie Reich, it was such a joy to catch up with you in your career again. It's great to see your face, especially, we haven't really talked in, I guess, 3 years. I can't believe that it's been, I guess it really has been about 3 years. I cannot believe that it's been 3 years.
I know. No, thank you guys so much for inviting me to be part of this. I love what you're doing, and you were both a joy to talk to and catch up, and should definitely do it again sometime soon.
I expect to involve you, even though your hands are full, in some way other than just as a podcast guest in Open Parameter. You'll hear from us again.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Angie. It was truly a pleasure, and yeah, I really miss seeing what you're up to, and I'll definitely make sure to keep reaching out and seeing what you're up to in the future.
Please do. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Open Parameter Podcast. You can find links to the different works and projects we talked about with Angie on our website. If you liked what you heard today, consider subscribing to our Patreon and help support the people who make this podcast possible. Patreon subscribers receive all monthly episodes released on the first Wednesday of each month. Additionally, subscribers gain access to our development version of Open Parameter Hub, a digital art gallery space that is accessible from any platform. Find those and a host of other benefits at patreon.com/openparameter. As always, go to openparameter.net for information on everything we're doing and to find information on all of our podcast guests. I'm Del Cook, Creative Director of Open Parameter. Abby Hawthorne is our music consultant and writer. Hannah Hughes is our graphic designer, and Stejara Danilescu is our visual and interactive media consultant. From all four of us here at Open Parameter, thank you so much for listening today. Please tune in again next week.